Welcome into the show today. Thank you for making this podcast a part of your day and for going on this podcasting journey with me. Hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, rate, review, and follow the show wherever you are currently listening to the show. We've got a loaded show today. We've got a lot of juicy topics. And as the offseason speculation begins, basically, we're at that point in the season where if a player becomes available, every discussion revolves around should the Minnesota Vikings target that player. And the beautiful thing about this podcast is that when there's a player available, we will actually analyze and discuss if the Minnesota Vikings should target them. For example, Myles Garrett just became available from the Cleveland Browns. He requested a trade. Should the Minnesota Vikings target Myles Garrett? That answer will come straight from this podcast. And there's not going to be any wishy-washy or, maybe they should. I'm going to tell you whether or not they should, and I'm going to have the courage of my convictions to answer that question. Another player, Cooper Kupp, just became available. Should the Minnesota Vikings target Cooper Kupp? Well, on this podcast, I am going to tell you if the Minnesota Vikings should target these guys. So let's start with Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett has been one of the best defensive players the NFL has seen in recent years. The problem with targeting Myles Garrett is this. The dude is 29 years old, and he turns 30 at the end of the year next season, December 29th. So you're not getting a guy mid-prime that's got years left of his NFL career. For example, his final year with Cleveland, he had 47 combo tackles, 40 solo tackles, but that's not why you bring in a Myles Garrett. You bring him in because of his ability to sack the quarterback. And that's something that he's been able to do for years. 14 sacks in 2024, 14 sacks in 2023, 16 sacks in 2021, 16 sacks in 2020, 12 sacks in 2020. Huh? What did I just say there? Hold on. So 14 and 24, 14 and 23, 16 and 22, 16 and 21, and 12 and 20. So this guy has consistently been able to sack the quarterback at an ultra high level in the NFL. The problem with trading for Myles Garrett is this. One, how much do you have to trade to get him? And number two, how many of these 14, 15, 16 sack seasons does Myles Garrett have left in him as he enters 30 years old next season? If you're a Buffalo Bills, if you're a Kansas City Chiefs, and you're just trying to squeeze out the rest of your Super Bowl window that you have, well, then you trade for Myles Garrett. But if you're just entering your Super Bowl window like the Minnesota Vikings hope to in the next year or two, well, then you don't trade for him. Plus, I guarantee you this. The Cleveland Browns are going to explore trading Myles Garrett to the Minnesota Vikings because of this. J.J. McCarthy. McCarthy would have been the number one overall pick in this upcoming NFL draft. And with McCarthy comes a very inexpensive rookie contract that the Cleveland Browns could try and manage to afford with that Deshaun Watson contract looming over their heads. And it sounds like if the Deshaun Watson injury continues, it sounds like there's certain contract language in his situation where they would not have to pay him as much as they would have if he was healthy. So Myles Garrett requests a trade. And they are going to pursue J.J. McCarthy because of his contract, because of his upside, and because they don't have a quarterback on the roster that can play. They don't want to go through the carousel of Jameis Winston and the guy with two last names or Deshaun Watson anymore. They want a competent rookie quarterback that could step in and deliver. And who better than a guy like J.J. McCarthy? Because the guy's got clear leadership qualities. And you think about McCarthy, he's the exact opposite of Deshaun Watson. He's bizarro Deshaun Watson. So if I'm a Cleveland Browns individual or worker or employee within that organization, I am targeting J.J. McCarthy, number 1, number 2, and number 3. I'm offering Myles Garrett and a number 1 overall pick to try to pry J.J. McCarthy away from the Minnesota Vikings. Now, the question is, will the Minnesota Vikings take that bait? Because there's a lot that would have to be offered to get McCarthy. It's not just going to be Myles Garrett. He's 29 years old, going on 30 next season. And how many years does a defensive player really dominate the league? I mean, prime. What's the prime for NFL defensive guys? What's the prime for a Myles Garrett? Like, when is that drop-off going to happen? Think about one of the all-time Minnesota Vikings great defensive players. You think about Jared Allen, okay? The dude had, when he was 29 years old, like Myles Garrett is right now, he had 22 sacks. His best season in the NFL. Phenomenal, right? I mean, that's what you want from a guy at the end of his prime. 22 sacks Jared Allen had. The next season in 2012, still a spectacular season. He had 12 sacks for the Vikings. His next season, 2013, 31 years old, he had 11 and a half sacks. So still very solid. Very good numbers from Allen at 31 years old. But then at 32, there is a clear drop-off of performance from Jared Allen. Went from 22 sacks to 12 sacks to 11 and a half. Went to Chicago in 2014 and puts up 5.5 sacks. You could probably expect the same thing from Myles Garrett. Garrett, if the Minnesota Vikings decided to trade for him, he would put up good numbers next season for the Minnesota Vikings. And he would probably put up good numbers the following season. But when is that jump off the cliff moment for Myles Garrett? He's a competitive, athletic, crazy man playing the defensive position. The dude is an athletic specimen, and he's huge. And if the Minnesota Vikings added him and decided to re-sign Sam Darnold, well, the Minnesota Vikings would probably be a very good football team next year. But the problem with that is this. The Vikings already have Grenard and Van Ginkel. And by trading away McCarthy, you are forfeiting a bunch of salary cap space to bring in Darnold and Myles Garrett. It's not going to happen. The Minnesota Vikings are never and would never pull off this trade. And all the speculation that comes with the Myles Garrett to the Minnesota Vikings, don't believe it, don't trust it, don't see it. It's all because it's talking heads discussing and debating the topic, but it's not real management breaking it down and talking about it. That's the difference with this podcast, okay? This podcast offers you both. I tell you what's going to happen from the Minnesota Vikings organizational perspective. They are not trading for Myles Garrett, but there are going to be topics until Myles Garrett is traded on whether or not the Vikings should do it. And from that standpoint, I'm also going to tell you what the truth is. The Vikings should not pull off this trade. It would be like the Los Angeles Lakers and Dallas Mavericks trading Anthony Davis, a 31-year-old guy at the end of his prime, for a 25-year-old superstar. That would be as stupid as this trade. Oh, actually happened. Still can't believe that happened. Luka Doncic, 25 years old, traded for Anthony Davis, a 31-year-old guy that's always injured at the end of his prime. The Lakers fleeced the Dallas Mavericks. And if the Minnesota Vikings traded McCarthy to the Cleveland Browns for Myles Garrett, the Browns would have fleeced the Minnesota Vikings. So do not expect this trade to even be discussed, but expect the Cleveland Browns to pursue McCarthy. And guess what? There's going to be a report this offseason because this is how it works. It worked the same way with O'Connell. It worked the same way with Jefferson. Expect an insider, a Jay Glazer, a Pelissaro, a Rappaport. Expect one of those guys to break down a story, to share a report that the Cleveland Browns are interested in pursuing J.J. McCarthy. But here's the problem with that report. They're not reporting from the Minnesota Vikings perspective. And that's the most annoying part of these reports. These reports blow up and they go crazy. And O'Connell, he might be traded. Jefferson, they might be traded. But the problem with these reports is that they're one-sided. They're not coming from the Minnesota Vikings perspective. They're coming from other teams' perspective that want to snag players or coaches on the Minnesota Vikings roster. So don't buy it, don't believe it, and don't fall for the trap. Don't do it. Be smarter than that. The Vikings are not going to pursue Myles Garrett, even when the report comes out that the Cleveland Browns are interested in trading for J.J. McCarthy. Understand the story. Understand where the story is being leaked from. And it's being leaked from the Cleveland Browns organization. That's where the report's coming from. It's not coming from the Minnesota Vikings organization. Because that's going to happen. It's going to come out. The NFL is a 24-hour news cycle. And the Browns need a quarterback badly on a low contract. They can't afford a Darnold for $40, $50 million a year. They need a rookie contract at that quarterback position. And who better than a leader like J.J. McCarthy if you're a Cleveland Browns employee? All right. I was fired up today. Whew, wasn't really expecting that. Honestly, I was going to go down a couple different avenues today, and I was cut straight through the bull. That's what this podcast does. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of it. Hit that subscribe button and follow button. Thank you for going on this podcasting journey with me. I hope you felt the 100% honest 100% of the time today.